In the plant profile series of videos, today we will take a look at Ferry's round Dutch cabbage. Just like the other cabbage varieties that I've grown, I like to sow my seeds indoors, and this gives me about 6 weeks head start into the growing season. And let's jump 45 days ahead. These plants have been growing pretty well. I've transplanted these cabbage seedlings into this container. I'm growing 2 of these in this container, and as you can see, this net is a very easy way to keep the cabbage fly out of entering the cabbage leaf and then laying its eggs. And a lot of people do not have success growing cabbage because the cabbage worms or the loopers, they eat all the cabbage leaves and then they're discouraged to grow cabbage again. But this technique works really well. Try it out and you won't be disappointed. So the soil mix that I'm using to grow these cabbage in containers is the Pro Mix HP potting mix, and this has done a good job for me for a lot of vegetables that I've grown. And in addition to this container is about 12 inches deep, about 10 to 15 inches wide. I'm also growing this cabbage in the ground. So I'm going to do a comparison and see which cabbage does better. And if you remember from one of my previous videos, you would know the answer to that by now. I'm not going to go over all the details of the cabbage plant, what fertilizers to add for the cabbage, what kind of watering schedule they need. I've covered this in my video on growing cabbages, and towards the end of this video you will find a link to that video which will explain all the details of growing cabbage in general. In this episode I'm going to concentrate on this variety of cabbage, which is the Ferry's round Dutch cabbage, and this is an excellent cabbage variety in my opinion. It's a prolific grower. You can see that within about 75 days it's showing really good signs of growth. The leaf damage towards the bottom of the plant that you see is actually due to some snails that have been chewing on the leaves. Now, as long as you keep the snail population or the slug population a little bit under control, you should have no problem growing cabbage. And as you can see here, this net again has done a really good job of protecting the cabbage plants from the cabbage fly, which in turn lays these eggs. This is one egg that got laid on my plant. You can see this caterpillar right here. This is a cabbage looper, and it is a voracious eater. This is going to feed on all your cabbage leaves. Now it's about 95 days since we've been growing this cabbage, and when do you know that your cabbage is ready for harvest? The way that I determine this is by feeling around the head of the cabbage. Once the cabbage heads are pretty decently sized, you can feel around the head, and if it's hard to touch, that's the time you can start harvesting your cabbage. So let's go ahead and harvest one of these cabbages, which I think is ready for harvest. So here's our first cabbage harvest. This is the one that was growing in the ground. You can see one slug there that I just removed, and this is a pretty decent sized cabbage head. Not one of the biggest heads that you would get, but still pretty good. It's about a medium sized cabbage head, and it's pretty firm and pretty nice. And this is what I like about some cabbage plants. They produce some nice firm heads. And this is the other cabbage that we will now harvest from the container. And as you can see, the overall health of the plant in the container looks a little better to me. The cabbage is much better formed, and one of the cabbage heads was slightly smaller, but again, a very healthy plant with a lot of leaves, a lot of vigor, and this is why I think the Pro Mix HP is definitely a good potting mix to use. I've had success with a lot of vegetables growing in that mix, and you can even prepare your own mix by mixing in peat moss, perlite, and some lime. So this is the other cabbage that we're harvesting. Once again, very nicely grown cabbage, as you can see. And we're going to remove the side leaves. Now, some of you have asked whether the side leaves are edible. And yes, they are edible. They are very much edible. However, I just prefer to get the head of the cabbage out and then use it. I just find that the cabbage head is a lot easier to cook compared to the leaves on the side. So there we have it. That's our cabbage profile for the Ferrys round Dutch cabbage. Overall, a very prolific cabbage, extremely nice hardy plant, very firm round heads, and they were excellent to eat as well. The flavor was pretty good. So this is definitely one variety that I can recommend. So I'd like to know from you, my YouTube viewers, have you tried growing this cabbage variety before? Or which is your favorite cabbage variety to grow? I'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.